All right, so we're doing our backyard series of things that we have in and around our backyards since we can't get out and go anywhere. What we're looking at here, this is called a redbud, and it's called that because of the pinkish red blossoms that it has. This small tree is in the pea family, and it's in the pea family because the fruit that it has are basically these pea-shaped pods, and they look like little beans that hang off the tree when it is going to fruit. You can hear my Jack Russell terrorists in the background there as they're carrying on. But redbud is quite interesting. It's one of the first trees that we see that blooms this time of year, early spring. It's a very pollution tolerant species, so a lot of times you'll find this growing along roadsides, but it'll also grow in woods where it gets plenty of sunlight. But it's a really nice understory species. Redbud is also called Judas tree, and that legend goes back to a time actually from a different species that's actually found in Eurasia, but it's closely related to this species. But it was called Judas tree because it was believed that this was the tree that Judas Iscariot hung himself from after he betrayed Jesus before Jesus was crucified. And so this species always blooms just before starting just before April, and will usually finish up about the middle of April. So it's always around Easter when you see this species begin to bloom. But it is a really nice tree. You can actually see if I can get a limb here and get a little closer here. I don't know how well you can see that. See the little pink blossoms there, but quite an attractive species. This is redbud, also known as Cercis canadensis. Here's a closer view of the flowers on the redbud. This is a different tree than what we were looking at a while ago, but both are eastern redbud, Cercis canadensis. Some people compare the flowers, or they say that they look like hummingbirds. I don't see that myself, really, but I guess to each his own. But for old timers, back in the day when the Southern Appalachians were being settled, redbud, dogwood, and serviceberry were three species that let people know that spring was coming. When both of those species, or when all three of those species began to flower, then that was when they knew that it was time to get ready for spring. So this is a beautiful, beautiful species. So here what we have is serviceberry. Serviceberry is a member of the rose family, has these beautiful white flowers. Other members of this family include pears, apples, peaches, cherries, things like that. But serviceberry, along with redbud and dogwood, are our earliest flowering Southern Appalachian trees. And serviceberry gets its name from back in the days when there were circuit riding preachers. The circuit riding preacher would come through the mountains just as spring was coming, so the snow was gone from the ground, and it made travel much more easy for the circuit riding preachers to come through. So the settlers named this tree serviceberry because they said that it was time for the service. Or in fact, this tree also is called a sarvis. So Southern Appalachian pioneers would change the E sound in serviceberry to a much harsher ah sound and call it sarvis instead of service. So when it was time for the sarvis, this particular tree would be blooming. So hence serviceberry. Some of the old timers still call this sarvis tree. So now you've got a little bit of Southern Appalachian history to think about as well. So really interesting species. But this is one of our harbingers of spring. Serviceberry, Amelanchier arborea. Okay guys, here we're looking at a flowering dogwood. Its scientific name is Cornus florida. Flowering dogwood is one of 3 dogwood species found in the Southern Appalachians. One is called alternate leaf dogwood, the other one is silky dogwood. But none of them look quite like flowering dogwood. What makes flowering dogwood unique is its floral structure. And we're going to take a quick look at that. So if we look at flowering dogwood, we can see that it has these very unique showy flowers. And this is one of the things that really sets it apart from the other 2 species. Flowering dogwood, if you look closely, has these interesting flowers that have what we call bracts. These showy things that many people call petals are actually not true petals, but rather they are scales that cover the flowering bud. And their actual true name is a bract, which basically just is an enlarged scale. And the actual flower for flowering dogwood is the center part that you see there, that green and yellowish looking thing in the middle. And I don't know how well you can see that here, but that's where the flowers are. And usually there's clusters of several flowers, and each one of those individual flowers in that cluster has its own male and female parts. So it has pistils and stamens. And when this thing is through flowering and begins to fruit, the fruit show up later in the year, late summer, early fall, and they'll be red in color. And you'll actually see a cluster of berries where those flowers are. Usually there'll be as many as anywhere from 3 to 5 berries. They don't stay on there very long because birds like to come and eat them. Now, as we were talking with the redbud and the serviceberry, both of those species have a lot of interesting folklore as far as their traditions associated with Easter and spring, being that they bloom right around the beginning of spring and when Easter comes on the scene. But flowering dogwood has a history that's connected very closely to that of redbud as far as folklore is concerned. Many people, and this is all in recorded legend, especially Southern Appalachian folklore, they say that the dogwood was provided the wood that was used for the cross of Jesus Christ. And the way the legend goes is that after Jesus was crucified, the dogwood tree was cursed by God so that it could never be used for crucifixion again. He cursed it so that it never grew tall again, and that its wood would be weak and not unable to support its use as a cross. Now, they also attributed this tree basically due to, if you look at the flowers on each one of those bracts, you'll see a red spot out at the end. The flower shaped like a cross. Okay, and at the center of each bract, you'll see these red spots, and supposedly that's where, or are supposed to represent, where Jesus' hands and feet were on the cross, and also his head would have been up at the top and would have been bleeding from the crown of thorns. And then the flowers in the center of the larger flower itself, those are all are part of or meant to represent the crown of thorns. So it's all quite interesting stuff. But this is flowering dogwood, and also just like serviceberry and redbud, it is a harbinger of spring. When we see flowering dogwood begin to appear, it lets us know that spring has arrived. Flowering dogwood is also the North Carolina state flower, so it has a very important tie to North Carolina. North Carolina's epicenter for dogwood growth. Dogwoods are actually becoming somewhat scarce due to several different fungi that impact them. Among those is dogwood anthracnose, which is a fungus that attacks the tree and basically will cause its decline. And dogwood anthracnose is actually a fungus that is non-native to the United States. So it's an exotic invasive species that is having an impact on our state flower. And we are seeing declines, particularly in the higher elevations where it stays damp and is really provides the right media for fungal growth. So that's not a good thing. But we also are seeing some decline in dogwoods even down in the lower elevations where we are. But very interesting species. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of or more understanding of this wonderful species that we have here in North Carolina.